Back in 2006, one of my favorite podcasts was Jeff Goldsmith's Creative Screenwriting Podcast, where he frequently interviewed writers and dug deep into the nerdy parts of their process. And there was one episode I remember where he talked to Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, the writers of Mission Impossible 3, Star Trek, Transformers, a ton of awesome stuff. They were talking about their work on Mission Impossible 3, and they described an outlining method I had never heard before. They said that J.J. Abrams taught them to visualize a movie like a clock, with the midpoint of the film being at the 30-minute mark of the clock, and so on. They described it as this really great way to visualize the audience's experience, where they would expect action, where they would expect time to breathe, etc. I thought that was really cool, but then I forgot about it until about 4 years later when I was randomly watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I started pausing the movie at key moments to see what the time code was, just as a crazy experiment. I jotted down the time codes for every main story beat as I watched it. And the next morning, I drew a circle on a piece of paper, remembering this clock method, and I started dropping the film and its time codes into it, using the 30-minute point on the clock as the 1 hour point, so each half of the clock represented an hour. The first thing I noticed was where the act breaks fell, here and here. Then I started tracing character threads. Let's track the thread for the character of Marion. Here's where Marion is first mentioned. Here's where she enters the story, bringing us into Act 2. Here's where she punches Indy, implying a history. Here's where she seemingly dies in the truck explosion. Here's where we discover she's alive, but Indy leaves her in Belloc's tent so as not to raise suspicion. Here's where we pick back up with her in Belloc's tent. Here's where she's thrown into the Well of Souls with Indy and they work together to escape. Here's where she kisses Indy for the first time in the film. Here's where the Nazis board the submarine and take her and the Ark, pushing us into Act 3. Here's where Indy decides not to blow up the Ark and her. And you see it yet? This is the part that blew my mind. Symmetry. This is balanced with this. So let's track Sallah in the film. Here's where the character of Sallah enters the film, and here's where he exits the film. Right? One more. Here's where the Ark is introduced into the story, and we see an illustration of it being opened, and it's insinuated that terrible things will happen when it's opened. Here's where Indy discovers the exact location of the Ark. Right? Okay? Here's where Indy finds the Ark. Here's where the Ark is opened, and we see terrible things happen when it's opened. So, I could not stop thinking about this. I started clocking all of my favorite movies. I would watch them, write down time codes of important beats, translate it over to a clock, and trace story threads. Soon enough, my office looked like that of a conspiracy theorist. Now, I would argue that more often than not, this story symmetry is completely unintentional on the writer's part. I think it's more proof that great storytelling has a rhythm and a rhyme to it. So before I go any further, I need to make this very clear. This is not a secret formula for writing $1 million script. If anything, this is a really practical method of organizing your ideas and working the problems, of asking your story questions and extracting ideas out of what you already have.